Please welcome Sall Grover, Rachael Wong, Moira Deeming and Amanda Stoker.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being up bright and early, ready for a little bit more CPAC fun. We are so blessed to have this super powered panel of incredible ladies. I feel honoured to be sharing a stage with them. We've got Sall Grover, Rachael Wong and Moira Deeming. You'll probably know them all already because they are on the front line of fighting for something that just a decade or two ago would have gone without saying, would have been utterly obvious. And that is for people to understand that there is a biological connection to what it means to be a woman. Now, we're going to have some great chats about this now. I want to start with you, Sall. You are involved in litigation at the moment, and it is about your social networking site for women. Tell us about what you're fighting for in that litigation and why it's something about which you're not prepared to compromise.
Okay, so I created a platform for women, and a man who claims to be a woman wanted to gain access to it. I said no, and now he's taking me to federal court on the grounds of gender identity discrimination. Because not that I just don't think he's a woman, I know he's not a woman. So basically, we are fighting for women to be recognised in law as a class of human beings that men cannot identify into. In the Sex Discrimination Act, gender identity was put into it in 2013. So there's a conflict in law between sex, which is real, and gender identity, which is a man-made concept. So we're doing a constitutional challenge and going to hopefully win and prevail that women are adult human females and no man is a woman.
What a concept to fight for. Now, what I think is really important about this is that you're not really just fighting for a common sense definition here. You said to me in a conversation we had quite some time ago that it actually goes beyond the safety of women's spaces or the ability of women to be able to network online. It's actually about the right of us as individuals to be able to settle on only having to say things that we believe and know are true. Explain what you meant by that.
Exactly. So women's rights are really the canary in the coal mine here. I feel I had no choice but to basically go ahead and just sort of respond to this lawsuit and go with it, because what is fundamentally here is freedom of belief. Either I'm forced to believe that a man is a woman by the state or I'm not. And I'm very much anyone can identify however they want. I don't care. That is a free society. But the moment you're forcing other people to believe it, we're not in a free society. If you're forcing people to say that a man is she. And so for me, when it comes down to it, while we're not fighting this specifically in a court of law, for me, the fight is freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. These are too important to back down from.
Yep. It cannot be the case that governments can force individuals to affirm that 2 + 2 = 6.
Yeah, it feels very much like even George Orwell wouldn't have tried this. It's just gone too far.
Now, you are being so brave in this David and Goliath litigation, but you need support and you need help. Tell people who want to how they can get behind you.
Okay, basically we need money. So for federal court, basically we have to raise $500,000 to fight this. If it goes to the High Court, and there's a good chance that it will be $1 million. So we created our own crowdfunding platform, gigglecrowdfund.com. And all of the money goes to our fantastic legal team to fight it and make sure that women's rights are protected in law for spaces, services and sport, and then also a win for our freedom of belief.
Well, if you want warriors to take up the fight, then if you are able, please get behind them when they need a hand. Moira, you have been a warrior too in fighting for the right for women to have their own spaces and to be acknowledged for their biological difference. And you've copped the rough end of the stick in the political sense as a consequence. But what does this tell us about the dangers of organising political parties around personalities and a follow the leader at all costs mentality, as opposed to arranging ourselves around principles that transcend any one person?
Yeah, so I think political parties, state that they are organised around principles, and for good reason, and so that people with different personalities should be able to pull together all in the same direction. So I think it was very sad that this whole issue was even put to a vote. I do feel sad for the colleagues that, even the ones that voted against me, because they were put in a very, very difficult situation. And people might say that they stumbled at a moral hurdle, and I would say that I was innocent and I shouldn't have been expelled. But this is what happens. If you don't organise around principles, you will corrupt each other. And so we need to make sure that the people inside the Liberal Party are all united on what it is that we actually believe.
100%. Rachael, you're doing some incredible work through Women's Forum about helping people understand the practical effect of challenges to the definition of woman and the spaces that have been traditionally reserved for women. But I wonder if you can tell us a little something about the danger that comes when we are asked to sign up to what are actually pretty out there political concepts in the name of politeness. We've heard a lot about it's just good manners lately. Well, we're all very good-mannered people, I think, but it pretty quickly becomes coercive. How does that happen? And tell us what we do about it.
So this notion, as you say, of politeness, or we might hear about it being called kindness or inclusivity, these notions have been used to push the fiction that men can be women, that girls can be boys, throughout every facet of our society, harming our entire culture, but in particular women and girls and children. And this coercion is manifesting in multiple different ways. So we have women and girls being forced to share female-only spaces with biological males, whether it be bathrooms, changing rooms, prisons, domestic violence shelters, forced to participate in sport with biological males, forced to acknowledge men as women, otherwise lose their job, be expelled from their party, be sued, be taken to human rights tribunals, be censored, abused, vilified, and so on. And the coercion also manifests in our healthcare system, where children are being encouraged down this pathway of gender care, gender affirmation, resulting in irreversible damage in many, many cases. And then we've got the women who are trying to speak out about these things, and they're being coerced into silence and so on. But I want to mention a few examples in particular in relation to the extreme end, because obviously we've got lost opportunity when it comes to sport, when it comes to awards and all of that. We've got men winning awards. We've got Leah Thomas in the US catapulting from number 462 in female swimming to number 1 in women's swimming. But then we have the extreme end of the spectrum, where women are being sexually assaulted and raped in what should be female-only spaces. So we've seen numerous cases now overseas where women have been imprisoned with biological male sex offenders, raped or sexually assaulted in prison, impregnated in prison. In Australia, we know there are male sex offenders being housed in women's prisons. Victoria, and I've talked with Moira and Sall and worked with multiple women on this particular case, there is a male sex offender currently being housed in a women's prison in Victoria with vulnerable women who many have backgrounds of sexual assault and abuse and trauma. These women have asked the authorities to remove this man. The authorities have ignored them. We've also asked them to remove this man. They've ignored us. And so those are just some of the harms that we're seeing from this idea of being polite and kind and inclusive and, recognising men as women and so on. And it's devastating for our culture, and particularly for women and girls.
It is really interesting that those who would have championed feminism back in the days when women were fighting for the vote, those traditional feminists would have almost no place now in a lot of the feminist movement, because what they're now fighting for is for men to be women, taking away what is essentially one of the few distinctions that are truly unable to be surmounted by science or society. It's a really interesting thing. I heard you mention sport in there. Now, I want you all to congratulate the former man, now woman, who broke the Canadian powerlifting record overnight by 200 pounds. Well done. She is very, very concerned about why all of the other women were just so hopeless in the category. Nothing to do with, the 40 times more testosterone that particular competitor had. But quite seriously, there are risks beyond just fairness to having what are essentially biological men competing in women's sport. How do those dangers play out? And what do those risks look like for the long term? Because it's more than just about who stands on the podium. Moira.
First up, the most glaringly obvious danger for me is children. So as a teacher, I just couldn't believe that my authority was being directed towards children in such a way that it was gaslighting them and removing all of the safeguards that all teachers everywhere know we need, like not having male teachers supervise the female swimming rooms, like not letting the males into the girls' toilets. I just cannot believe the absolute total wholesale destruction of child safeguarding. They've put into policies and in the law that teachers are allowed to lie and withhold information from parents. This is a legal deconstruction of every single parental right that we've ever held dear, and every single right as a good teacher to do all the things that the parents want me to do, which is to look after their children. They've got a Doctors in Schools program now where doctors can come in and, they've got a mandate to lift up some kids' top. And I remember complaining about it and saying, but we don't have adults alone in rooms with children. We don't do that. We've got rules against that. Oh, it's a doctor. That's even worse. And this is behind the parents' backs. So they've taken away the consent for parents to know when their kids are on Medicare. You get it automatically flipped over at 12 or 13. So mum and dad have to get you to sign it back to them if you want to keep it. So for me, number one is just child safeguarding. That is just unbelievable. I can't believe that has happened and that there's not more of a stink about it, especially to the point where you'll have your children taken away and surgically operated on. It's ridiculous. But for us as women and adults, of course, that's terrible. You think about rape victims. You can't ask for a female examiner. There was a rape victim in the UK who was having some reconstructive surgery, and she was refused that surgery because she was upset that there was a male nurse that came in to do her intimate care. I mean, that is not polite. That is not kind. That is abusive, and that is cruel. So they are being totally hypocritical.
Not good manners at all, really.
And when it comes to the sports issue, it's so obvious. There's the dangers, there's the physical dangers. Like, we might not like that this is the reality, but men are stronger than women. That is why rapes happen, basically. Yeah. It's not that we let them happen. So we're ignoring these big biological realities that aren't pleasant, but they're just real. But then you can even have sports where it's not even mainly maybe about physical safety. But if you have a man in it, so like weightlifting, for example, so there's no contact there. That man, one, he's going to win it. But two, he has excluded a woman. So this is not about inclusion at all. This is complete gaslighting. The woman has missed out on an opportunity to compete. And at the moment, it's the World Chess Organization has just banned men being able to identify into the women's category. And there's a lot of people going, oh, why? And it's like, we're not saying that women are stupider than men or anything like that. No, we're saying that most of the chess masters in the world are men. For women to have an opportunity in this male-dominated sport, there needs to be a women's competition. And if you have a man in it, you're taking that away. It's that simple.
It's a development opportunity.
It's just truth versus fiction. Yeah. It's just, even if all of the fairness, all of the safety, if that didn't exist, I almost don't need it to make the argument. It's just not true that men are women. It's as simple as that. It's not reality.
Not bad. children really, I think, are facing risks in this space that were not even contemplated a decade or two ago. What do you think is behind this push to bring gender ideology into the younger years? And what do you see as the, how shall we say, the right side of history when it comes to providing sterilising drugs, life-changing surgeries to those who are too young to serve in the military, too young to vote, too young to drink? Why do we let them permanently mutilate their bodies? I might send it to you, Rach.
Well, it's a really, really big question, because I think there is so much that could be said about why this is happening. You know, you've got concerns around the sexualisation of children, how that ties into gender ideology and transitioning. You've got Big Pharma and the interest that they have in basically getting clients for life, because once you've transitioned a child, then they have to be on hormones and puberty blockers and so on forever. But then, so there's a lot that could be said about why it's happening. But then in terms of why, in terms of the next step, in terms of why the children are actually skyrocketing when it comes to presenting with gender dysphoria and turning up at the clinics and wanting to be the opposite sex, you've got the influences of social media, you've got peer influence, you've got the media itself, you've got our educational systems now, and so and then you've got all these underlying health issues as well that aren't being dealt with properly. So they are being completely ignored, shoved aside. You've got depression, anxiety, autism. You've got backgrounds of sexual abuse and trauma and family dysfunction, and those are the things that are, I guess, behind the sort of idea of gender dysphoria. Not true gender dysphoria, mind you, because I would say that the amount of people who are suffering with true gender dysphoria is very, very, very small. What we're seeing now in children, particularly in young girls, is this manufactured gender dysphoria that comes from our culture and all these different kinds of influences.
It's a really good point.
And
Sall.
just also on that, for men to be able to claim that they're women, they need to be able to say that they're born in the wrong body, all of this nonsense that they've come up with, and for that creates the concept of a trans child, because then you've basically been like, this is a lifelong struggle. It's not that it's just a guy that actually is an autogynephile, Google it, who is sexually aroused at the concept of himself as a woman. Instead of us being repulsed by that, we're now sympathetic because this is someone born in the wrong body. All of that creates the trans child. It's all there to validate what are very, very dangerous concepts.
Can I just make the point that,
Please.
I mean, you just list the things that are now being required of us and think about the kind of people that we usually put in that category. I would say we already have a word for them. So you're cutting the connection between the parents and the child. You're introducing sexual ideas to the child behind the parent's back. You're telling the child that they can make choices that you would only think that adults can make, and they can make those choices behind their parents' backs. I've actually seen it written, and in the curriculums, they call it gender euphoria. Like it's a fun choice. Now, people who go behind a parent's back and sexualise children, we already have a category for that. And I'm not saying everyone's in that category, but I'm saying that's absolutely unacceptable for all of the same reasons. Parents are their children's best protectors.
Yeah, too right. 100%. Rach, you've been quite right to observe that there are a very small number of genuinely gender dysphoric people, and there's a long history of people in that category. They're generally male, but the explosion in cases of this modern gender dysphoria has really been among women, or girls, and that's a new thing. Something like 2,000% increases in the UK, and it's been replicated around the Western world. There's not been a very clear enunciation, I think, about the link to the sexualisation of culture that you mentioned, and indeed the proliferation of sexual material in our culture, including something as old as pornography, but now in the modern form on the internet. What is the relationship between the proliferation of pornography and these devastating outcomes that we see for young people in the trans space?
This is a super interesting area, and we're probably not going to have time to go into it too deeply, but I would encourage everyone to read a recent article by a woman called Genevieve Gluck about how pornography forged the trans movement. It's just been written in the past week. It's fantastic. And when it comes to porn and transgenderism, there's sort of two sides of the coin. So just very quickly, because we've already talked about women and girls, but pornography has resulted in such a hypersexualised culture that there are women and girls who don't want to be women and girls because they've been degraded and objectified, and as a result they hate being women and they hate their bodies. And so there's that connection between pornography and transgenderism for females. But when it comes to men, what we're seeing a huge rise in the accessibility and in the promotion of transgender porn. So I think last year Pornhub saw a 75% increase, with transgender porn being, I think, the 7th most searched pornography. And what we're seeing is predominantly pornography with trans women, so that's men who identify as women, and as Sall said, predominantly autogynephiles, who are men who derive sexual pleasure from being women, from being treated as women, from acting like women. And as we know with porn, it's incredibly addictive. It's the most addictive kind of drug that's out there. It's incredibly damaging. But the more you consume it, the more extreme it needs to get. And that's why we have things like autogynephilia, transgenderism, and so on playing into that. And so that has now resulted in this category of men who identify as women because they derive sexual pleasure from it. It's fueling that. And those are the kinds of men that women in particular do not want in their spaces.
One of the things that is really highlighted by all of this, and I think you've done this so well in your work, Moira, is to observe that the role of parents has never been more important than it is right now. How can we all, as good parents and good members of a community that consists of children that we love, do our bit to protect them from these influences? Moira, I might start with you.
We all need to be talking to our own children a lot more than we are. Please don't assume that what's going on in any school, I don't care if it's a Catholic school or a Christian school, I don't care which school it is, it's a mandated curriculum, and teachers, I don't know if you know this, I can really bring anything that I like into a classroom and I can talk about whatever I like for 45 minutes. And if I happen to be a zealot and a very charming zealot and I'm interested in peeling off loyalty from your children towards you and putting it onto me, which some narcissistic teachers do, it's far easier than you think. They need to have a closer relationship with their parents than their teachers. You need to be aware of what's in the curriculum. It's absolutely terrible. And you need to make sure you don't underestimate what you are up against. You are up against a curriculum. You are up against the law. You are up against policies. You are up against social media. I mean, I've done a lot of research into the predatory behaviour. There are a group of trans people who call it their mission to sort of turn kids trans. Their language is revolting. But the point is, you are really up against it. And look, don't underestimate those algorithms. You know, you think you've raised your child well. I've met lots of parents who've children, they couldn't have done any better. They just could not have done any better. But you're up against, you know, millions of dollars, algorithms that know your children's brains better than we could ever know. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just saying you've got to keep your relationship with your children. You've got to be asking gentle questions so that they can think things through. They're not going to be allowed to think it through at school. They've got to be able to think it through at home. And then you've got to help them work out strategies to survive school, to survive university, to survive at work without gaslighting themselves and having a little bit of a boundary. Because, you know, if we just tell them to let all their boundaries be pushed backwards into oblivion, you know, that's not helpful. Remember, don't fall for that lie. It's not nice, it's not polite. You're allowed to have a boundary, you're allowed to ask questions, you're allowed to politely say, no, thank you.
Good point. We're just about out of time. Rachael, final thoughts on how we can help to protect children and make sure that we can get them safely to adulthood where they can make informed choices.
I agree with everything Moira said. I think it's really important for parents to stay vigilant. And I'd also say don't underestimate the power that you can have as parents and individuals in pushing back against this. A few weeks ago, our organisation was involved in pushing back against a book, some of you may have heard of it, called Welcome to Sex, which has been sold in Australian stores, which has been stocked in school libraries and public libraries and so on. And not only does that book sexualise children, but it was laced with gender ideology, so pushing this idea that boys can be girls and girls can be boys and so on. And within 24 hours of us and others sort of raising the alarm on this, parents and other individuals pushed back, they complained to Big W, they wrote emails, they wrote social media
And they got a
comments.
huge impact.
They got a huge impact. The book was pulled overnight. Obviously, it's still in other places and we've still got work to do, but that's just, I think, a really good story to show that, people do have power, particularly when it comes to, corporations. Yeah. Vote with your wallets, so.
And Sal, this idea that we must be prepared to stand for truth, obviously lovingly and with care and with grace for those people who are struggling with difficult feelings in their lives, but this idea that we must not compromise on truth is really big for you. How does that play out in the way that we win this debate and protect children?
I mean, it does come down to what is reality? Is something true? Is it not? I mean, telling your children lies is not kind. It's not helping them. It's not helping adults either. It's just nonsense. And the kindest thing you can do to someone is say, no, actually, you are a man and you're going to have to learn how to cope with that reality. One of the detransitioners who I listen to a lot, and he's really quite brilliant, and on the concept of just protecting your children and where it's all happening, he says, when we were all younger, the danger was outside the house. Now it's inside because your child is there on a computer, you don't know what they're doing, who they're interacting with. So it sometimes might be safer to send them out on a bike outside than having them locked in their room with a laptop. So you have to be vigilant every second of the day.
Ladies, keep up the fight. If you'd like to support any of them in their very difficult and brave work, there are opportunities to do so, and you can find them all in their different internet spaces. But will you join with me in thanking these three fabulous warriors for their contributions today and their hard work in the community?
What a superstar panel, ladies and gentlemen.
Right, let's go. Thank you.
Please thank Moira, Rachael,